Hi everyone, thank you all for joining us. We're just going to give it a minute or two to let everyone come in and then we'll get started. Hi everyone, thank you all for joining us. We're delighted to have you all here. I can see a few people are still entering, but as people joining us, we'll get started. So yeah, thank you for joining today's training session on messaging and pitching. Today on the call, we have myself from the Big Give team alongside Marina, Sahil and Alex. And then from the IG team, we have the lovely Caitlin and Rachel who will be leading today's session. So we're just going to start with some general housekeeping and then we'll get started onto the main part of today's session. So just a reminder that you can use the chat throughout the session. Please do feel free to introduce yourselves. You'll see a little chat box at the bottom of the screen. You can say your name, your organization, and share your ideas throughout the session. And if you do have any issues at all, please do put them in the chat and we can get to them as soon as possible. If you have any questions throughout the session, you'll see a little Q&A box at the bottom of the screen as well. Please feel free to pop in your questions throughout the webinar and at the end, and we'll answer them throughout the session and at the end of the webinar as well. There will be a few live polls as well, and you'll see them pop up on your screen as they come. So please do get stuck in, answer those, and if you have any issues again, please do let us know. And finally, for anyone that needs a transcript, you should see a little transcript button at the bottom of the screen. You should be able to select the show subtitle button and you'll see subtitles for the webinar. But with that, I'll pass straight on to Caitlin and Rachel.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's so lovely to be here again for the second training. My name is Rachel. I'm the Managing Director of IG Advisors. Very, very briefly, we're a strategy consultancy and we work with both donors, so people, foundations, companies, people that have resources, and we help them with their philanthropic strategies, but we also work with fundraisers and charities, and we help raise money for amazing causes and redistribute them towards impact. So it's great to be here, and we kind of straddle both divides of the funding fundraiser equation, so we can bring some insights from that context into this training. Very briefly, as I said, I'm Rachel. I'll be leading half of this training. Actually, the second half of it, I'll do some intro pieces, and then I'll hand it over to my amazing colleague, Caitlin. Caitlin, do you want to just say hi quickly before we continue?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Caitlin. I'm a junior advisor at IG, and welcome back. And welcome if you're joining us for the first time as well. We're really excited.
Awesome. Okay, so just a few more bits and pieces before we dive into things. On the next slide, Caitlin, if you don't mind, we've got, so yeah, here we go. This is the training structure. So I know you already know this, but just to reiterate, this is training session number 2, which is all about messaging and pitching your work. We have 2 more this week. So next up, we have communication channels and social media. So that's obviously very relevant and kind of a continuation of our messaging conversation today. And then we're going to have a session later this week called Ask the Panel, where there's going to be some previous charities who've worked on a Big Give campaign before, who are going to share their successes, their challenges, their secrets, their hacks, their tips, etc. So you can ask directly to people who've gone through this. And then the campaign will happen, and then we'll come back at the very end for a reflection session on planning what comes next. How do you use the momentum that you've gotten from this campaign and ensure that it's sustainable for you in the future? So that's what's to come. In terms of today, we have an hour with you. We're going to keep very strictly, hopefully, to that hour. I'm saying this to hold ourselves accountable to that. We have an ambitious agenda, so we're going to, try and get through everything. But of course, you will have this deck at the end of it. So if there's a slide that we don't go into too much detail on, don't worry about screenshotting or taking notes. You will have this deck afterwards, so you can follow up on everything we're talking about. We're going to start first by talking about messaging in general. We're then going to give you some spotlights of examples of really great women and girls campaigns for inspiration. And then we're going to talk about developing an impactful pitch, what goes into that magic pitch. And then we're going to close with a Q&A. So we're going to keep at least the last 15 minutes of this call for Q&A with you. As we said before, the Q&A box, which is on the very bottom of your screen, is where you should put all your questions. So please don't put them in the chat as much as you can remember to, because they might get lost in the flurry of messages. All questions should go into the Q&A box, and we will address those at the end. So to recap, today there are two objectives. Number one, learning how to develop effective campaign messaging. And then number two is setting the seeds for creating an impactful pitch to sell your organization's work. And of course, this is all about the Big Give campaign, but the lessons and the insights that we're sharing today are very much applicable above and beyond this specific campaign moment. And of course, because we only have 1 hour with you, we're not going to go too deep into the exercises, but rather we're going to give you some structure and some frameworks and some recommendations that you can take offline and do with your teams to create all the materials that you need to be successful. So before we get into it, there's a poll that we want to do with you, which is actually about the Big Gives messaging. So this is not about your messaging. But for this campaign, we've come up with a few options for taglines for the campaign, public taglines. And we would love to hear which one you like best. We want to kind of co-create this with you and see if you have any feedback. Of course, if you have any other campaign ideas, feel free to put them in the chat. All ideas welcome, but we're going to launch a poll. And this is just kind of, gut check, finger in the wind. We would love to know which one of these 3 sentences makes you feel most excited about this campaign or proud to be involved. So I won't read them out because you can see them here. But Sahil, would you mind? There we go. Perfect. So just have a quick moment to read this. We would love to know what you think. How should the Big Give do its messaging and represent you and this collaboration in the most appropriate and the most exciting way? So please do take a moment, vote for whichever one you like, and then we'll move on. Okay. Sahil, when everyone's voted, can you share the results?
Yeah, we just have, I think, a few more people still voting, so
okay.
Let's give it a couple more seconds.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. Sahil, can you publish the results if it lets you? Oh, here we go. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So there's kind of a split between the first two. The first one a little bit more. This is great. Okay. And I saw some feedback in the chat as well about length, and that is, you're absolutely right. That's very much taken. So thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Okay. I think we got what we needed. Moving on. One last poll, I believe. Yes. Okay. One last poll before we dive in, which is, how are you doing? And I mean you specifically as human beings. So not necessarily your organization, but how comfortable are you personally with fundraising, messaging, and pitching, i.e. the topics that we're exploring today? We would love to know, are you, on a scale of 1 to 5, are you not comfortable at all? Please help me. Are you super confident I could teach the training? Where in that spectrum do you fall? So yeah, we're going to launch another poll. And if you could just let us know how you're feeling at this moment, that'd be really useful. Okay, just another few moments and then we'll publish the results of this. Okay, all right. Okay, this is good. This is exactly why you're here. So thank you. This is really helpful for us to know so that we can make sure that we're going into the right level of detail. This kind of in the middle, knowing the basics, but there are people that are not so comfortable, and people in the not comfortable at all help category. So thank you for being here. You're in exactly the right place. We will do our best to move you up that spectrum, but this is just 1 hour, and rest assured, a lot of these activities are things that you can do and think about afterwards, to strengthen what you have and what you can sell for this campaign and beyond. So thank you. And I think that's it for the introduction. Okay, so Caitlin, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. So hello, everyone. As we've already established, this session is all about messaging. And we wanted to share this quote with you because we feel like it really says a lot about the current state of play. So brands of toothpaste are peddled with far more sophistication than all of the world's life-saving causes. But hopefully by the end of today's session, we will have started to change that. So before we dive into the nitty-gritty of messaging, we just wanted to emphasize how exciting the Women and Girls Match Fund opportunity is for our messaging. So there's an opportunity at the organizational level. So we have a chance to boost our profiles, showcase our impact and our value. There's a chance to experiment with what messaging works on different social media platforms, what resonates with different audiences. And we also have a chance to step back and reflect on our organizational presence online, because often in the day-to-day, we don't necessarily have that chance to just step back and reflect. But there's also lots of exciting opportunities for the sector itself. So we have a chance to raise awareness of all of these important causes and issue areas that we're working to address. We have a chance to influence narratives online. So thinking about pushing out a more empowering framing or challenging problematic stereotypes. We have an opportunity to amplify women's voices and center women's stories. And we also have a chance to lead by example. So practice what we preach when it comes to messaging. So we're aware that messaging isn't always people's favorite part of the job, but it's actually really, really exciting. So let's remember that throughout the session. So how to do messaging well. First of all, we always recommend thinking about your core values, because they're going to help you convey your identity, convey who you are, and make people want to back that. Remember your audience. So in training session 1, we were creating donor profiles and donor personas. So how is your messaging speaking to those personas' interests and motivations? Include a case for need. So that's why this cause, but also case for support. So why this organization? Why support us? Showcase your impact. This can be through personal stories where appropriate. That can be really, really effective. But make sure you're showing why you're an amazing organization to support. Explain how supporters can get involved. Sometimes that's a step that we forget to pay enough attention to. And one of the things we're going to be thinking about in today's session is why should they support through the Match Fund? So how can we leverage the Match Fund opportunity through our messaging? Use visual assets. And again, that's a point we're going to be coming back to later. And also keep it short and snappy. So particularly if we're going to be doing a lot of social media work, platforms like Twitter, like Instagram, we need to be able to distill our messaging. And that actually also speaks nicely to some of the comments on the taglines. So thinking about how to keep things nice and snappy. So we have an exercise. We love doing these exercises with you. So we would like for all of us to close our eyes and take 1 minute to visualize our dream Women and Girls Match Fund donor. So take a few seconds, close your eyes. Who is a current or prospective donor that you would really love to support your campaign? Have they given to you before? What do they care about? What are they passionate about? Just a few seconds to come up with a dream match fund donor. Okay. And with that donor in mind, we would love you to put yourselves in their shoes and come up with the 3 key questions that you would want to understand about your charity or the campaign if you were that dream donor. So, what do you need to know to inform a donation? What information would you be particularly excited to learn more about? So, you're your dream donor. What do you need to know? And what's going to excite you? And a minute or so for this. And we would love if you could share at least one of your questions in the chat box. So what do you need to know about the campaign? Or what about the campaign is really exciting and you need to understand more about? And please do share with us in the chat some of your questions as your dream donor. Maybe just 30 seconds or so more on this. Do you want to understand more about match funding? Is there a particular aspect of your charity's work that might be super interesting to this imaginary donor? We have some questions coming through. So, will my full donation go to the benefit of the service user? So thinking about how we convey our impact, how we convey our organizational values can be really valuable on this point. Will my donation definitely be matched? Yeah, match funding can seem too good to be true. So it's definitely great to be thinking about how can we communicate that, yes, your donations really will get doubled as long as you go through the website, you pay by credit, debit card, all those things. A lot about, the benefits of the funding. So again, really making sure that we're speaking to impact and the case for need. Yep, a lot about impact. Oh, an interesting one about people's misconceptions. Why should I support this community? And yeah, a lot about where's my money going? What difference will it make? A question about, can I have an elevator pitch, which we will be helping you all with later in this session. So yeah, these are all really, really useful. And definitely we want to be thinking about these questions about what's the impact going to be, explaining what match funding is, the fact that, yes, you can get your donations doubled. And also it comes back to this opportunity question, seizing the opportunity of challenging those problematic narratives and stereotypes that people might have in mind. So thanks so much for sharing all those. And I definitely recommend everyone looks in the chat because there is some really nice inspiration in there. We've included a slide of some example questions that you can look at if you're stuck. But definitely that's a really great exercise to make sure that you're answering the questions that your donors might have, and you're really making sure you're tailoring your messaging. So we're going to move on to how to leverage the campaign. We're very fortunate because a lot of the elements of this campaign lend really well to fundraising. So the first is the urgency. So we really want to be stressing, you have this short time frame to get your donations doubled between the 8th and the 15th of March. Let's make sure that we're leveraging that urgency in our messaging. The second thing we want to make sure we're leveraging is the incentive, which a lot of you have already indicated in the chat. Stress the fact that, donations get doubled, they get matched. We can also capitalize on the International Women's Day moment. So that's on the 8th of March, and there's going to be a lot of social media buzz around that we want to be responding to. But also we can use that moment to say, if you want to support, consider supporting us. And then also the need to unlock the remaining X amount of match funding so that your organization can achieve X, Y, and Z. Let's make sure we're really communicating that need, which again, a lot of you have indicated in the chat is really important. So we know how to tailor our messaging to our audience. We're leveraging the Women and Girls Match Fund campaign to our advantage, but we want to make sure that we're actually telling our supporters what we need them to do, which is a step that sometimes it can be easy to forget, even though it's so vital. So calls to action, we should be including them in all our collateral, all our pitching, our social media posts, and they are short statements, which make a real clear ask of our supporters. And we need to tailor these to the audience. So from some people, we might want donations. From others, we might want to ask, share this post, spread the word with your networks. So with that in mind, we would like to start thinking about some calls to action on this webinar. So we would like you to spend just a couple of minutes creating at least one call to action for your campaign. So it could be renew your support, continue the conversation, donate today. It's a clear ask, almost an order actually, that you're making to your supporters. So a minute or so, maybe until 23, 24 past, to start thinking about that. And please do share in the chat with us. And you can see we've highlighted some parts in yellow where you could consider including a hyperlink in your call to action, or tagging relevant accounts or using relevant hashtags if you're on social media. Yeah, so we've got some ideas about donate today for twice the impact, transform women's potential and make your support go twice as far. And yeah, maybe like a link on the transform women's potential to your Big Give campaign page could be really nice there. So just, yeah, maybe 30 more seconds. We'd love to hear some of your call to action ideas in the chat. Yeah, make a real impact on our services by doubling your donation here. Lots of really creative ideas. You might also, as well as ideas around donate now to double impact, you might also want to create some around continuing the conversation, share this post, share with your networks. Make sure that you're thinking about all of the things that you might need from your supporters, including but also beyond donations. a comment around kind of being careful that when we're saying double your donation, it's clear that we can get our donations doubled rather than we're having to pay double. So that's a useful comment. But yeah, completely agree with Rachel, loving all these. So we're going to move on, but again, do have a look in the chat and continue thinking about calls to action, including beyond donate. Amazing work. Some really, really nice ones in there. Okay, so we've spoken a lot about text, but we just want to take a couple of minutes to remember the importance of visuals. So photos, diagrams, videos, GIFs, these are all going to enhance our messaging. They're going to help us break up large walls of text. They can help us to explain difficult concepts or ideas. And on social media, especially where a lot of our communication is going to be happening for this campaign, they're going to really help make sure our posts stand out. And one of the things we picked up on from the first training session was a number of people were talking about making videos for the campaign. So we just wanted to share a couple of tips for video content. So the first would be keep it short. Don't feel like you have to produce a whole movie. People's attention spans are very limited. So don't feel like you have to go crazy. A couple of minutes is definitely more than enough. Keep it authentic, share personal stories if that's appropriate. Content that people can really connect to. As we've just been talking about, remember to include a call to action and repurpose as much of the content as you can. So we know that a lot of people were talking about having limited capacity for the campaign. So if you are making a video, make sure that you're repurposing parts of the script or sharing short video clips or taking screenshots, really making the most of all that material. So finally, for this section, we just wanted to share this rule book with you, which we always find really, really useful when working on messaging. So the first is consistency. So of course, you want to tailor your messaging to the platform, tailor it to the audience, but there should be a consistent narrative running throughout. Keep your language clear. Explain any acronyms you use. Avoid super technical terms. Keep it as simple as possible. Keep it well structured. And in Rachel's section, we're actually going to see a really nice example of the pitch structure. Use your branding. So remember to use your logos, your style guides. When people look at these materials, you want to make sure that they know it's from you. Formatting. This is such an important point. So small things like bolding text, using bullet points, they really help the reader understand the message and not be too overwhelmed by what you're communicating. So formatting is really, really important. And then finally, voice. Let your organizational and your individual voices and your identities shine through. So that is the end of our introduction to messaging, but we wanted to give you a taste of what that could look like in practice. So we put together some examples of really great women and girls campaigns that we thought would be really useful for us to look at. So the first campaign is by an organization called Mamacash, and they are feminist grant makers. They support activists. And in 2018, they held a campaign which was all about 10,000 euros in 10 hours. And one of the things that they did for this campaign was they produced assets and copy bank materials that they asked their supporters to use to help them spread the word and fundraise. So again, this comes back to this question about capacity and the creative ways in which you can leverage your supporters and give them the tools to help fundraise for you. So we just wanted to share some of the resource, and we've included a link to the resource bank so that you can go in and have a look for yourself. But this is an example of one of their assets, and it's great in so many ways. So you have the donate now call to action. You have the 10,000 euros in 10 hours. So they're leveraging that urgency. You have their logo and their branding. It's very clearly a Mamacash campaign. We have a very empowering narrative framing. They're letting their voice shine through. So we have this kind of conversational, will you join me? And they're inviting people not just to give us money, but to become part of our community of change makers and activists. So it's really nice as well, the invitation to join a community. And they also, as we said, share some text for social media, an email. We're not going to read through all this now, but obviously you'll have it in the deck. And it does similar things to the visual assets. So it's conversational. The email has a subject line that really stands out. We have the urgency, this really empowering so what. So in the email text, it's, give us money so we can support activists that are creating a world of equality and joy. Lots of really, really nice elements going on. So we really recommend you take some time to have a look at that. So the second campaign we wanted to spotlight is by Sport England. So they're a public body that promote exercise in England. And they launched a campaign called This Girl Can, which isn't a fundraising campaign, but it's a really cool campaign about encouraging women and girls to get active. And we have this very empowering campaign slogan, and they did a really good job at sharing personal stories. So they shared video, case studies on their website. And it was a very realistic and inclusive approach. So they were showing women of all body types with all kinds of preferences for how they get active and stay fit. Obviously, one of the things that came up in session one is that not all of us have permission to use images or videos of service users. And we wanted to just take a second to recognize that there are ways of kind of sharing personal stories where appropriate that don't need to include images. So it could be written case studies, it could be infographics or diagrams. So yeah, there are definitely ways to work around that. You don't have to have video case studies. That's not a problem at all. But personal touches can be really effective, obviously where appropriate and where we have permission to share these stories. So finally, we would love to hear your inspiration. There are so many really cool campaigns out there. So we would like to know if you have a favorite campaign. It could be a women and girls campaign. It could be from a completely different sector. But are there any campaigns that you have found particularly memorable? We would love to hear in the chat. So maybe a minute or so to think about what other inspiration are you going to be using for this campaign? Oh, the ice bucket challenge. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because that is also a campaign we're going to be looking at in the communication channels and social media session. We're going to be breaking down how and why that worked so well. Ooh, Race for Life. Run 5, donate 5, nominate 5. Challenge 21. Lots of really nice campaign inspiration that I myself am also going to be looking up and getting inspired by after this call. Stop the cut. And we definitely recommend, you know, sometimes you just kind of hit a brick wall and you get stuck, and sometimes just looking for some inspiration or speaking to colleagues or peers and asking if they've seen anything cool can be really, really helpful just to get inspired. So we always recommend these kind of collective, let's share what we're seeing and what's really exciting us sessions. So this is definitely something you can take away with your team. Okay, well, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all that inspiration. I'm going to be looking at a lot of this myself. And I'm now going to pass on to Rachel, who's going to be talking about pitching. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Caitlin. Awesome. So I'll speak for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So just a reminder, if you have questions that are coming up, please do pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and then we can address them in about 10 minutes time. We already have 3 in there, but I want to make sure that we get the full list and answer all of your things. So okay, now we're going to talk about pitching specifically, which is obviously a part of messaging, but messaging can take many different forms: written, verbal, multimedia, etc. And now we're going to talk about the quality of what makes a really good pitch. And I know someone wrote in the chat earlier about one of the questions that a donor would ask them is, give me your 2-minute elevator pitch, which is what all donors will always ask you, which is of course a very verbal kind of interaction. But in a digital fundraising context, you also want to have a written elevator pitch, and you want to be able to translate between those 2 mediums to make sure that what you say is extremely accessible and clear very quickly to as many stakeholders as possible. So on the next slide, we've broken down the structure for you of what we would consider the best elements of a great pitch to be. And they're relatively straightforward. So I'm going to walk through them. And then I want to tell you 3 of the most common mistakes that people make with this pitch structure, because it's quite intuitive. You know, this isn't rocket science, but on the spot, and when you're rushing to get things done, it's so easy to miss out on some key elements. So of course, first, you want to start with, or you want to emphasize the problem, which is what we would call the case for need. Why is there an issue? What is the issue that you are addressing in the world, I should say? And I also want to quickly note that you don't have to necessarily do this completely linearly. Sometimes people want to start from, you know, one area and then circle back to the other. So that's kind of a choice. That's up to you and how you tell your narrative. But if you want to do it in this linear fashion, you can. So you have the problem and the issue that your charity is working to resolve. You have your mission, which is, what are you doing about that problem? What is your charity's mission statement? And you want that to be about 1 sentence, maybe 2 sentences maximum, but that's kind of what you're here to do about that problem. You have your activities, which is what you actually do as a charity, your actions that you take towards your mission, towards solving that problem. You have your impact, i.e. your achievements, your results, your outcomes. Relatively straightforward, but there's a common mistake here that I'm going to circle back to in a moment. And then you have your USP, or your case for support, which is why you. What is the unique value add that you as a person, you as a team, you as an organization are bringing towards this cause, and why should someone invest in you and not the similar charity with the similar mission statement down the street? So this is where you have to get a little bit healthily self-centered, I would say. There's a little bit of that involved in it. So, and I should also say that underpinning all of this, of course, is the case for support, or sorry, the call to action element that Caitlin mentioned earlier. So you definitely want to make sure that you end with a call to action. But there are 3 common mistakes that people make across this pitch structure. Number 1, a lot of times people only include a case for need, but not a case for support. So if you look at the 2 ends of this chart, you have the problem and then your USP. And a lot of times people illustrate the case for need and they end there. So they say, you know, there's this huge problem with homelessness among women and girls who are, you know, fleeing domestic violence. And we're here to address that problem. And it's a really big problem. That's just an example. But what they don't say is, we know that we're operating in an ecosystem of so many amazing charities and service providers who are adding value to this kind of cause. We are pulling this particular lever in that ecosystem. So by investing in us, you are strengthening the impact of everyone else too. We are a critical point in this theory of change for our work. And we're an amazing team. We're dynamic people. You'll love us. We know what we're doing. We're, you know, extremely smart, intelligent, and strategic. So you should invest in us. So you always want to make sure that you have that second part emphasized in whatever way you want to emphasize it, but don't just end with the case for need, include the case for support too, which is why you addressing this cause. Why are you the organization to do this? Number 1. Number 2 is in the activities bucket, in the middle one, the red bucket. Something that often happens here is that charities will include very weak verbs that describe what they do, or they won't include verbs at all. And that is a huge mistake. What you want to do is have the boldest, most exciting active verbs that are directly tied to your organization's name. So you don't want to say things like, oh, you know, we aim to help facilitate others to meet on the ground to do this thing. That's like, you're aiming, you're helping, you're facilitating. None of those things are that exciting, to be quite honest. If, you know, why would I give my money to someone who's aiming to help do something else for someone else to do the thing? You want to remove as many degrees of separation as possible from you and your organization and the ultimate end impact on women and girls. And that's not about lying. Of course it's not. I understand that some organizations are in an intermediary position where you are facilitating, or you're convening, or you're researching, or you're a thought leader, or you're building capacity of a certain space. And that is completely fine, but you still want to use sparkly, exciting, dynamic, bold, fabulous verbs that are attached to your organization's name. You don't want to kick the can too far down the road with the impact you're creating. So that's mistake number 2. Active verbs, bold, fabulous active verbs. And then number 3, last thing here, is about impact. And this is a very interesting mistake that happens a lot, where people will only describe the activities, which are the what, but they will leave out the impact, which is the so what. Why does this matter? And that is often because they think that the so what is implied in the activities that they're describing. So for example, a common example I've seen is around providing shelter for women and girls. So we've seen organizations say things like, we've provided 100 beds to women and girls fleeing domestic violence in the last year. Full stop. But that is a what. That's not a so what. That's an output. That's not an outcome. And of course, any good, rational person would understand implicitly or intuitively the value of that kind of service. But it's a huge mistake in fundraising to assume that your donors will do that work for you, because oftentimes they won't. Or oftentimes another charity will, and then they're deciding between 2 narratives. One just happens to be a bit more compelling. So what you always want to do is, when you're looking at your messaging, you want to say to yourself, is this a what, or is this a so what? And have I forgotten the so what? And why does that matter? What is the impact of providing shelter to women and girls who are fleeing this situation? How does that heal their trauma and their intergenerational wounds? And what does that mean for society? And what does that mean for their lives and their dignity? Those are the pieces that you need to emphasize, because that is the so what. That's that is what people are investing in, that longer term vision. So never forget to include those outcomes, those so whats. It's very easy to, but don't wait for donors to fill in those dots for you, because they might disappoint you, unfortunately, and your work is too important to leave that dot connecting up to them. So that's the structure of a pitch. We can definitely answer any questions you have about that in just a few moments. So please do pop them in the Q&A box if any have come up. But as Caitlin said, structure is your best friend with any pitch. You want to follow a clear narrative where you're addressing all of these key questions in whatever order makes most sense and makes intuitive sense for your story. But you want to hit on all of these points all of the time: written, verbal, 2 minutes, 12 minutes. I know elevator pitches, the buildings can be various heights. You can be in that elevator for a very long time, but you don't want it to be too high. You want to keep it a little bit short and snappy, as Caitlin said. So we've included an example here. I won't go into it too much because of time, but there's an amazing charity in Canada called the Equality Fund. They're a feminist grant maker, but they're also a fundraising organization. They fundraise for their grant making. And we've included here their kind of pitch, or their written explanation, and we've broken down how their pitch, or why it's so excellent, how they address all of the things that we just described in the previous slide around the problem, the mission, the activities, the impact, and the USP. Really, really important to have all of those kind of coming together in the perfect puzzle piece so that you have excellent messaging. And then on the next slide, just to wrap up with pitching, what you want to do, ultimately, you're here selling the dream. You are here buying people into your vision, your mission, your theory of change. And that is so key, especially when you're pursuing unrestricted fundraising, which I know this campaign is inherently letting you do. But you want to buy people into that bigger vision of what you do, why it's so amazing, and why you, yes, you are the perfect person and organization to deliver on that dream. Showing confidence and passion, very important. It's important, of course, you don't want to be arrogant, but you don't want to be too humble where people forget the value add that you bring and don't feel compelled to donate to you and not necessarily to others. Being clear, concise, and structured is everything. It is absolutely everything. It's still astonishing how many people communicate in a non-clear and non-concise and non-structured way, and it's very difficult to follow. So just kind of manage your rabbit holes and your tangents and try and keep everything focused. And then, of course, listening, deep listening is what makes a good pitch. And that's both in person and in a digital environment where you can see what people are writing, you can see how they're communicating, you can mirror their language as and when that's appropriate and aligns with your values as well. That's what you want to look for. And then, of course, always don't end there. Always provide a suggestion of next steps. One of the most hilarious and common things that donors tell us is, oh, I had this great meeting with a charity and they had this amazing thing, but they never asked me for money. So I'm not going to offer it, they want to be asked. And if you break down that awkwardness and you bridge that gap, then they will often meet you on that bridge. But if you leave it up to them to make the offer, you might not get it. So don't do that to yourselves, because it's often simpler than you think. Okay. Perfectly, almost on time. So we've got just over 15 minutes to answer some of your questions now. So Caitlin, I'll hand over to you to moderate this bit.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I can see we already have some questions in the Q&A box. So if you have any questions, please do continue to put them in the Q&A box so we can see them. So when DMing people, when direct messaging people, how apologetic should you be in asking for a donation? And this is from an embarrassed Brit. Rachel, do you have, I feel like you have strong thoughts on this.
Yeah, sure. So, it's a great question. I'm an embarrassed Canadian, though not that embarrassed, but I hear you, and I understand that sometimes you don't want to be too forward, you don't want to come off as arrogant, but you should never, ever, ever be apologetic for asking for support for your campaign, because what you're doing there is you are establishing the dynamic that you should be embarrassed, that they're doing you a massive favor, that you are in debt to them, when actually what fundraising is you're doing them a favor. They have resources, they have passion and interest, and they want to help the world. They want to help women and girls, and you are making that happen for them. So don't ever forget that when fundraising in a campaign or in any kind of environment, the fundraiser is helping the donor solve a problem, and you have equal weight, equal power. You can sit at that table just as boldly as they can. And if you apologize for asking, then you're only negotiating against yourself. And the world and the fundraising climate will already negotiate against you. So don't add one more layer onto that. Be your own best advocate and never apologize for asking.
Yeah, definitely. And, oftentimes donors want to know what you need from them. So that's why things like really clear calls to action are so important, because as Rachel said, you might actually be doing them a favor by telling them what you need. So we have a question about, do you give your name in direct messages, first name, full name? I definitely think it's nice to share your name, introduce yourself. We were talking about this last time, but fundraising is ultimately about relationships. So introducing yourself and building those personal connections are really, really important. I don't know if you'd add anything to that, Rachel.
No, I think that's completely right. I think it depends on what context, what kind of platform you're working on in terms of the direct message. But yeah, people give to people, and people are giving. Your organization is only your people. It's your people with a brand on top of it. So you need to, the more that you can build that personal trust and relationship, the more people are willing to give to you. So I'd say as you feel comfortable, be your full self in that fundraising context, and you'll probably have lots of success.
Okay, amazing. So how often should you tweet during the campaign? So actually in the next session tomorrow, we're going to be talking all about social media, but you definitely want to be tweeting frequently, multiple times a day during this campaign. It's a very short time window, and on Twitter especially, things move so fast. Mm-hmm. So yeah. Mm-hmm. But we will be coming back to social media tomorrow. So if that's something you're interested in, we do recommend joining that session. The best way to deliver the elevator pitch, Rachel, your area of expertise.
Yeah, I guess, well, there's no bad way or a wrong place to deliver it. It would depend on your campaign strategy. I think you should have what I'd always recommend is having a standardized elevator pitch that is written. So that's appropriate for including in your proposals at the very beginning, kind of a summary. I'd say there's a written version, then there's a social media written version, which is, summarized. That's appropriate length for a tweet or a whatever kind of post. And then there's a verbal version that everyone on your team should speak to consistently and make it their own and play around with language as and when, but still follow that same structure so that no matter who the donor is speaking with, they get that consistent experience. So I think that's the key I would give there, but I don't think there's a wrong place to put it and a wrong, what you probably want to do is, you want to have different, as I said, varying lengths. And if you're meeting in person with someone, what I always recommend is letting them know you're about to do your elevator pitch rather than just launching into a very long monologue about what you do and why it's important. Everyone knows what an elevator pitch, you can make a bit of a joke out of it and say, okay, let me give you the elevator summary of what we do. Are you ready to get into the building with me? I promise it's not too tall a building. I'll speak for like 5 minutes and then we can, answer any questions. But I think the more that you give your listener or your audience a preview of what you're about to tell them and why, the more relaxed they will be as a listener and more able to kind of follow along with your narrative structure.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. We have a question about how best to ask for future funding and kind of going back afterwards, waiting for a little. Yeah. This is something we're going to be coming back to in the final training session, but I don't know if
it's a good question, and I think it really depends on how much they have given you in the first instance and proportional to who they are as a donor. So what you don't want to do, of course, is someone donates to you and then 2 seconds later you ask them for more money without properly thanking them. The period of the thanking of the donor is called stewardship, where someone has given you money or resources of any kind, and then you have to have a period of thanking them in whatever way, whether that's a shout out on your social media channels, a handwritten note from whomever on your team, a report, whatever that is, which has to be proportional to the resource that you have and the capacity you have to provide that, but also how much they've given you and what their expectations might be. So you definitely want to have a period that's just a thank you period. You don't want to have a please give us more money period right away. But then you do ultimately want to transition that into cultivation of a new gift for future. And the answer to that question is, I'd say, highly intuitive. There's no magic answer for wait 30 days and then ask again. It's really about how warm the relationship is. How much do they know you? Have they given to you in the past regularly? Are they giving a huge amount that is that, you know, kind of requires some breathing space to have the full potential of, or did they give you a small amount and you know they can give much more? All of those kinds of variables go into answering that question. So I would say definitely wait, but this is where the art part of the fundraising comes into it. This is the emotional intelligence, intuition. I think I'm getting ready to ask for the renewal. And when in doubt, ask your donor. Say, you know, we love having you on board. We're really keen to have you as a regular giver. I'd love to talk to you about future opportunities. When would feel appropriate for you to have that discussion? So when in doubt, ask.
Amazing. And we have a comment about if approaching someone on social media, is it best to do it as the charity or as an individual? So kind of the convention does depend on the platform to an extent. So on LinkedIn, for example, we see it a lot where it can be an individual working at the organization approaching someone, whereas on other social media platforms, that would potentially feel quite out of the blue. So definitely getting the feel for the platform will be really helpful on that point. I don't know if there's anything else you'd add, Rachel.
No, I completely agree. I think, as you say, this is, of course, it's nice to have the personal touch, but if your social media platform is more of a personal platform for you rather than a professional one like LinkedIn, as Caitlin said, and if you feel like your personal brand might not say what you wanted to say or align with the message, then probably not. But yeah, that's a decision up to you, but probably when in doubt, go from your organization's account, but you can still sign it off as a name, or you can still add personal touches to that. But I think it really would depend on what your personal social media accounts, how they functioned. Do you have a platform yourself? Do you have a staff member who has a really large following and they're almost an influencer or a micro influencer in their own regard, and therefore them reaching out personally on behalf of the organization would have more impact? So I'd say it's a bit of a case-by-case basis, but when in doubt, go from your organizational account.
Yeah, and definitely true what Rachel said about even if you're going from your organizational account, that doesn't mean that you can't make it personal and tailored and, you know, build that relationship. Okay, amazing. I think that's it for the Q&A. So just to quickly close the session, I'm going to share my screen again. And we would like to take a second to reflect on what we've achieved by joining today's session. So one of the things we were saying in training session 1 is we need to take care of ourselves. We need to celebrate all of our achievements, no matter how small. So we would love to hear from you in the chat, just very quickly, 30 seconds. The first thing that comes to mind that you have learned during this session. So have you produced a nice call to action? Have you gained some inspiration? We have someone saying they had no idea what an elevator pitch was, and now they do. So that's great news. Lots of inspiration, which is amazing. And that's also largely thanks to everyone being so engaged during this webinar and sharing all of their inspiring campaign ideas. Someone has potentially got a tagline for their charity, feeling enabled, lots of inspiration, and some great campaign ideas. So that's all great. Well done, everyone. And also for being so engaged and sharing all your ideas so we can inspire each other. So final thing, we would love to know how you're doing now. So after everything you've learned today, how are you feeling about messaging and pitching for fundraising? And there should be a poll that comes on screen. So are you feeling still in need of a lot of help, or are you feeling a lot better? We have two significantly betters. I think one of them was meant to be I feel better, but yeah, we'd love to hear from you. And then maybe we can close the poll and share. Amazing. So lots of lots of people feeling better. People feeling better, like a bit more comfortable, but still have a long way to go. As we said last session, that is also a completely valid way to be feeling. As you start drafting stuff and putting these ideas into practice, hopefully that will feel a lot better. So next session tomorrow, 11:30 till 12:30, we will be seeing you for a session about the different communication channels you can use. We'll be diving a bit deeper into some of the social media aspects we've touched on today. So yeah, really looking forward to that. And thanks so much, everyone, for joining the webinar today. Any final words from the Big Give?
I don't think so. I think you've summed it up pretty well, and it's great to have you all here, and we look forward to the next session tomorrow.
Thank you, everyone.
Amazing. Thanks so much, everyone, and see you tomorrow.
Bye.